All right. Next, we are going to have Shay is going to give us an update on, let's see here, COVID-19 vaccine around employment law considerations and employer best practices. So I am going to reshare this screen, this presentation, and let's see here. Awesome. Okay, Shay.
Awesome.
You're up. Do you want me to move seats for you?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. So now that we heard a lot about the research that went into the COVID-19 vaccine, which was really awesome,
Great.
we wanted to kind of follow up a little bit now that it's becoming more available to the workforce. How does this impact, how you'll approach it as an employer? And what kind of things do we need to keep in mind? So we put together a presentation just to kind of go through the employment law side of it and best practices and what people are doing with the vaccine. So there's a few different approaches that you can take when it comes to the vaccine. You can mandate the vaccine, which we'll go through in more detail. You can motivate people to get the vaccine, or you can take the approach of education. You're going to educate them, or maybe you do nothing, which I guess, so that's not listed, but I guess that could technically be an option as well. All right, so mandating. So can you mandate the vaccine? You can actually mandate the vaccine. So the EEOC, they did release updated guidance on December 16, 2020, that states that employers can, subject to certain limitations, require immunization of their workers without violating the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title VII, or other federal anti-discrimination laws if it's job-related and consistent with business necessity. The EEOC's guidance also states that employers can require proof that employees have been vaccinated. However, an employer must meet certain requirements if it wants to find out why an employee has not received the vaccine. And I believe we go through more details on that soon. But basically, with the ADA, there's certain times that you can or cannot ask medical related questions. So that's really what this is addressing here. And then, yeah, so we'll add the job related and consistent with business necessity. That's gonna vary depending on what business you're in. So for example, if you're in the long-term care industry, they had a staggering 40% of deaths in the beginning of the virus. And so in an environment like that, it really makes a lot of sense if they choose that we're gonna make vaccines mandatory. I think that makes a lot of sense, and that definitely is job related and consistent with business necessity. Other businesses that maybe aren't in that healthcare spectrum, they're gonna maybe need to evaluate that a little harder. And so we'll talk more about that. But also keep in mind that this is the latest guidance as of now. As the pandemic continues to evolve, the restriction and guidance may change. So you definitely want to keep up to date, on the CDC, on the EEOC's website, and OSHA, things like that. Those are kind of the people, the government authorities that have been on the forefront of this that we want to keep posted with. So it mentioned you can mandate the vaccine without it violating the ADA and Title VII, but there are some caveats to that. So we want to talk about that. So one thing is if your approach is going to be mandating, you need to be prepared for accommodation requests, whether from a disability standpoint or a Title VII religious accommodation request. So the Americans with Disabilities Act, it says that employers must provide reasonable accommodations to qualified individuals with disabilities who are employees or applicants for employment, unless doing so would cause undue hardship, which undue hardship is basically like significant cost to the business. It would shut your business down, or it's just so costly, is a little bit of what plays into that. An accommodation basically is any change in the work environment or in the way things are customarily done that enables an individual with a disability to enjoy equal employment opportunities. So some examples of that could be modifications or adjustments to a job application process that enables qualified applicants with a disability to be considered for the position. So maybe they can't interview in person, they're high risk. They want to do an interview over Zoom. So that would be an example of an accommodation request that an applicant is asking you for. Modifications or adjustments to the work environment or to the manner of circumstances under which the position held or desired is customarily performed that enable a qualified individual with a disability to perform the essential functions of that position. And modification or adjustments that enable a covered entity's employee with a disability to enjoy equal benefits and privileges of employment or as enjoyed by similarly situated employees without disabilities. So a big thing that's come into play is remote work. And if you made accommodations in March with remote work, then that's something that's going to come into play with the vaccine as well, and your assessments of whether you can make alternate accommodations if someone with a disability cannot get a vaccine. So we'll talk more about that as well, but you want to be prepared to make any reasonable accommodations or be prepared for them to review them for employees with a disability or medical condition that makes it unsafe for them to get the vaccine. The other one we mentioned was Title VII, and that basically the provision in there is people with sincerely held religious beliefs and the business's obligation to review their accommodation request there. So Title VII of the Civil Rights Act says the law requires an employer or other covered entity to reasonably accommodate an employee's religious beliefs or practices unless doing so would cause more than a minimal burden on the operations of the employer's business. This means an employer may be required to make reasonable adjustments to the work environment that will allow an employee to practice his or her religion. Some examples are flexible scheduling, shift substitutions, job reassignments, modification to workplace policies or practices. So you may have a employee come up to you saying, hey, my religion, I don't believe in vaccines in our religion. So if there's religious objections to them getting the vaccine, then that's an example of an accommodation request that you would need to review as a business. So you want to be prepared for that. And then it is on an individual assessment basis. So depending on the person's position, that's all going to come into play, like their position, their job duties. That's all going to come into play on whether you decide whether you can accommodate that individual or not, and assessing whether you can. If somebody is, a healthcare worker and they're working directly with someone, then they're going to be on a higher level of risk versus maybe the admin person who works in the back office and they have a door closed and it's pretty much just them back there. So that's what we're talking about with individual assessment, is everybody's got different job duties and not everyone's going to be on the same level of risk there as far as being in the work environment around other people. So each request has to be evaluated on an individual basis to determine whether a reasonable accommodation can be provided that would enable the employee to perform the essential functions of the job without posing a direct threat to the workplace. So COVID-19 would be a threat to the workplace. So that's something that you're going to have to evaluate. Is there another way that we can accommodate this individual and eliminate the threat, or other measures that will help combat the threat? Like, can we social distance? Can we wear masks? Can this person work by themselves over here in a room? Can they work remotely? So those are all things that you need to factor into your determination of possible accommodations. So is the vaccine a medical exam? So how I was talking about with the Americans with Disabilities Act, there's only certain times you can ask medical related questions or have someone do a medical exam. So the EEOC has stated in their recent guidance that vaccinations are not a medical exam, but certain medical related questions need to be posed to an individual to ensure that the individual does not have a medical condition that makes the vaccine unsafe. So those questions could be classified as a disability related inquiries. which can only be asked under certain circumstances as regulated by the ADA. So if you're having your own vaccine program in the workplace and you're trying to do these screening questions to your employees, that's where you can run into problems, because those are disability related inquiries if you're going to find out about potential medical issues that they have. However, when these questions are posed by a third party that's not controlled by the employer, such as a pharmacy or healthcare provider, rather than the employer directly, or by a healthcare provider working under contract for an employer, these limitations on those disability related inquiries do not exist. So yeah, if you have your own vaccine program or you're contracting it out, then those are risks about those disability related inquiries. But they do say as well, if it's voluntary for employees to participate and answer those questions, then the EEOC has also said, as long as it's voluntary, that you can do that. But if you say you got to go to your healthcare provider, then that's different, because we're not regulating, the conversations that they have with their healthcare provider. We're not finding out about that information as the employer. So disability related inquiries. So questioning the employee about the reasons they haven't been vaccinated does constitute a disability related inquiry, because it may elicit information about a disability. The EEOC limits the type of information employers may obtain from employees and the circumstances that they may request it, in accordance with Title VII in the ADA. So as a rule of thumb, this even falls under traditional non-COVID times. The times that you can ask questions about disabilities, like make inquiries. During pre-offer, you may not make any inquiries about someone's disability or vaccination status. After a conditional job offer is made, you can make an inquiry about the vaccine, as long as you do it for all employees. And during employment, employers may not conduct medical examinations or ask disability-related questions unless the employer can demonstrate these actions are job-related and consistent with business necessity. So what is the job-related standard? That is, the employer will need to show how the employee's failure to be vaccinated would pose a direct threat to the well-being of that employee or others with whom the employee would have contact as part of their job duties. The pandemic guidance suggests that the employer should be able to establish the direct threat standard if the employee has significant contact with other works or third parties. Okay, so now what if someone refuses the vaccine? Can they be terminated? That is the ultimate question, right? So possibly, but in rare circumstances, and we would encourage you to check with legal counsel. If you're in this situation and you've mandated the vaccine and you're like, I'm gonna terminate this person because they won't get it, especially if it's due to one of those protected reasons of disability or Title VII and religious beliefs, I would recommend that you consult with legal counsel, especially with the laws ever changing and there are state laws being passed on some of these states. That way you just make sure you're up to date with the latest guidance. But basically the EEOC says possibly in rare circumstances, employers must make reasonable accommodations for employees with disabilities or religious objections and will need to follow the process under the ADA or Title VII before taking any adverse employment actions. Now, if the employer can establish the unvaccinated employee poses a direct threat that cannot be accommodated without an undue hardship, the employer can exclude the employee from the work site. But the employer cannot terminate the employee without further consideration of the employee's legal protections or other possible accommodations, including whether the employee can perform his or her job remotely. So you can eliminate, or you can say you can't come to the work site, but you need to consider all options here, whether they can work with a mask, social distancing. Would those also be effective options before you go to that termination route? In assessing hardship, the EEOC stated the following may impact the undue hardship consideration: prevalence of other employees in the workplace that have received a COVID-19 vaccine, and the amount of contact the employee has with others whose vaccination status may be unknown. So those are part of things that factor into it. And again, I would just recommend, if you're going to make that decision, especially based on a protected ADA Title VII accommodation request, that you do check with legal counsel. So other considerations, when considering a mandatory program. Will you be able to recruit or retain employees if you mandate the vaccine? That's a big consideration. We just had the staffing experts in Omaha come talk to us and said that the unemployment rate right now is 2.8% and how people are struggling to find talent. And even Seneca mentioned that in his presentation as well. And so if you know that you are struggling to find talent, or if you're if you take a read of your workplace and a lot of people seem like they're scared of the vaccine, they're hesitant, that's something you want to factor into your consideration, because if you're going to lose half your staff, or you're not going to be able to find people to fill these roles, then that's a real issue that you'll have to figure out. So how will your workforce react? If you mandate the vaccine, you force them to get it, will there be a negative reaction, or are people fine with it? You would want to just kind of take a little bit of a read of how people feel about it, and the general feelings, or maybe you just hear people talking about it and kind of take note of it. The nature of your business and the circumstances of each employee's job must be considered. So that's really talking about, again, the job related consistent with business necessity, and then that individual assessment. Is your business one where it is higher risk, that maybe it makes more sense for you to mandate it, versus maybe it's not that big of a deal. Maybe it's like a marketing company and we're doing a lot of stuff remotely for clients anyway, so we're really just around each other. Then maybe it's not as big of a deal for everybody to be vaccinated. Are there appropriate procedures in place with respect to processing of disability and accommodation requests, and have managers been trained on recognizing accommodation requests and what to do when they receive them? And are they trained on privacy of medical information? Those are all big considerations. In general, it's always good for managers to be trained on those things, because that is the business being put on notice. And those are areas of risk for your business. And so it's important that managers understand what to do so that it's handled properly. Are there clear expectations, policies, and training to ensure no retaliation against employees who request an accommodation? Vaccine authorization from the FDA is pursuant to the emergency use authorization standard, which is not the same as the typical FDA approval or licensure that is typical of other common vaccines, such as chickenpox or flu vaccine. I do think Seneca gave us some information. Hopefully you were here during his portion, but he was explaining a little bit about basically the difference there is that it's real time, I guess, in the system. So he was saying he didn't think there was a lot of difference. To be honest, I haven't looked fully into that aspect of it, so I'm not giving a recommendation one way or another, just so you know. EEOC guidance is guidance and it's not the law. So even though some employees may still challenge mandatory programs, or some employees may still challenge these mandatory programs, even though the EEOC guidance has said that you can mandate them, they may still challenge it. There's always the possibility that that could happen. And there is no guarantee that a court will react favorably. A mandatory program will face many legal nuances and limitations. So that makes it a bit more complicated to roll it out, right? If you plan to do a mandatory program, you'll want to carefully consider the process from beginning to end with the help of legal counsel and your HR team. FLSA consideration related to reimbursement of employee expenses incurred when obtaining the vaccine on the employer's behalf. So you talk to your payroll person here if you are planning on doing that and doing some reimbursement or incentives. They'll understand the tax implications and can let you know those. Is your environment unionized? If so, that's a whole nother layer, because then that kind of falls under protective or collective bargaining agreements, and that you need to collectively bargain in regards to this vaccine before making it mandatory for everyone. Then we have to keep in mind that there's vaccine prioritization requests. You know, states are rolling it out differently of like who has the vaccine available to them. And so, you know, will it be available to everybody if you're making it mandatory? Pregnant people, I think that there's some limitations still on that, on whether that's been 100% approved for pregnant women. And so keeping that in mind, you know, that some people may not have the vaccine available to them based on those waves of how it's being approved to get it yet. And then disciplinary action for those who don't get the vaccine, you know. So beyond, so you know, we've got the accommodation requests and stuff like that, and we know that we need to evaluate those and tread lightly there. But what if, even if someone doesn't fall into those protected categories and they don't want to get the vaccine, are you willing to discipline that employee? Are you willing to terminate that employee if they won't get the vaccine? Keep that in mind. If your best employee tells you, I don't like the vaccine, I'm not going to get it, are you going to fire that person? So that's all stuff that will factor into your considerations of whether to make it mandatory for your workplace. All right, how do people feel about the vaccine currently? That's kind of interesting and important. So according to an article by Pew Research called Growing Share of Americans Say They Plan to Get a COVID-19 Vaccine or Already Have, as of March 5th, 2021, 19% of adults say they have already received one dose of the vaccine, 32% they said they will get the vaccine, 17% said they will probably get the vaccine, and 15% said they probably would not get the vaccine, and 15% says they will not get the vaccine. Trust in the vaccine research and development process ties strongly to people's vaccine attitudes and actions. And those who do not, or probably do not plan to get the vaccine, some of the reasons that they listed were concerns about side effects, a sense that vaccines were developed and tested too quickly, and a desire to know more about how well they work. So if you're going to do the education approach that we are going to talk about, if you know kind of what people's typical objections are, then those are things you can focus on your education campaign. Other reasons are past mistakes by the medical care system, a sense that they don't need it or that they don't get vaccines generally. So maybe they just don't believe in vaccines just in general. So another thing we need to keep in mind is the CDC and OSHA guidance on masks. So as of the latest guidance, again, subject to change, on January 29, 2021, OSHA's current guidance recommends that employers should not distinguish between vaccinated and non-vaccinated employees. So you should continue to implement social distancing and face mask requirements even after employees are vaccinated, because medical experts need to understand more about the protection that the COVID vaccine provides. So even if somebody goes and gets their vaccine, they should still be wearing their mask in the workplace according to the OSHA and CDC guidance. And if you want more information, there is a link here. We can share this PowerPoint afterwards, I think. But there is a link here to find out more guidance. They did cover some other things in that guidance, but I was specifically focusing more on the vaccine here. So motivate. So if that's going to be your approach, what's the tips here? So the motivation realm can be complicated with legal risks as well. There's potential to violate wellness program rules if your reward is so great that it seems more like coercion. And then reasonable accommodation issues also arise under both disability and religious discrimination law, privacy issues, potential tax implications, benefit concerns, and potential for wage and hour liability. So you also should consult with legal counsel prior to implementing a program to motivate, if you're going to do like an incentive program for employees to get the vaccine. And unfortunately, the EEOC has been silent on guidance so far on incentivizing the vaccine. So they should really help us out here. Come on.
Come on now.
Yeah. But some things that employers are doing, if you plan to do the motivation route, some things that we have seen as trends are people are offering paid time off. So Seneca mentioned that sometimes there's some side effects for a couple days. Some employers are giving people PTO after they get the vaccine to take some time off and rest. Some are doing cash incentives, some are giving a gift or swag of modest value. Again, we want to be careful on not giving too much of an incentive where it feels like it's forced. And then you should make it available to people that need those accommodations as well. So if someone has a disability, they can't get the vaccine, is there a way they can earn that incentive as well besides getting the vaccine? And then some people who are doing that gift of modest value or a small incentive plan, they are pairing that with a raffle for a luxury item. So, okay, we're going to give you this cup or whatever cool item, and then we're going to enter you into a raffle for an Apple Watch or an iPad, some really cool item that the employees want. And then there's a reminder in here, as we talked about, there is some tax implications for, benefit or incentive reward programs and stuff like that. So I would encourage you to contact your payroll HR company, hopefully that's us, to inquire about implications for payroll taxes for any employee incentive programs and rewards to make sure that you're in compliance there. All right, now education route. If your strategy will be education, you can encourage company leaders to be vaccine champions. You can invite them to share with their staff their personal reasons for getting vaccinated and remind staff why it's important to be vaccinated. For a comprehensive and effective campaign, the more management from the top and middle management that you can include in the campaign, the better. Let them know that you are spreading the word on the vaccine because you care about their health. So make it about them and not about you. That's always a good rule of thumb. You care about their health, safety, and the benefits they will get from participating in the vaccine. Communicate transparency about the vaccine. The CDC has the most up-to-date guidance and already has some great resources set up to communicate information about the vaccine, answer some frequently asked questions that employees may have, and address myths and facts. So again, there's some links in here that I put embedded in the PowerPoint, but they literally already have some question and answer things. There's already some handouts and stuff like that. So you can go read up on those. You could distribute them to your staff as part of your communication campaign on the education front. You should create a communication plan. So whether it's going to be combined with, maybe you're having meetings about it, you're going to put some stuff up, posters up in the break rooms, you're going to email out updates, you're going to post it on your WorkLogic as a memo. So there's all variety ways that you can communicate updates to them. And then other recommendations from the CDC on how to build confidence in the vaccine include providing regular updates on the benefits of the vaccine, like safety, side effects, effectiveness of the vaccine, and what is not known. And if you get the vaccine, make it visible and celebrate it. So, take your post-vaccine selfies. I got the COVID vaccine today, and selfie it. You can provide stickers to staff who have been vaccinated and encourage them to share their pictures as well. And there is more information here as well, linked to the CDC coronavirus vaccine recommendations. That's a link to find out some more guidance as well there. And that's pretty much it. Let's see, are there any questions?
Bottom left corner.
How does it do that?
I don't know.
So weird. Oh. Nothing to me.
No questions.
All right. Well, awesome. Well, Taylor, you want to do your wrap-up closing comments?
Sure. Yeah. You come over there. Right on time with the schedule.
Oh, Michelle raised her hand.
Oh, Michelle raised her hand.
I don't know what.
Maybe she's clapping for us.
Oh, maybe.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up all of today's Alliance Summit. So for Shay and I, just want to say thank you so much for joining us. Oh, we do have one question. Okay, do you have a form for us to use when we have a known exposure?
when we have a known exposure.
Yes, like a known COVID exposure. I think Amy does, doesn't she?
I'll check with the safety team.
Yeah.
I know that, I mean, what I know about is the emergency sick leave form, but maybe they have something beyond that.
Michelle.
Michelle.
Got it, to inform other employees.
To inform other employees when they've been a known exposure.
Perfect, Michelle, we will get that over. Yep, perfect. Okay, we will get that over to Amy and her team and get something back to you for that.
Awesome.
Awesome. Here's all of our contact information. If you ever want to get in touch with either of us to go through any of Shay's wonderful trainings that she had mentioned today, one of which she did, or to learn more about what the Alliance Group does, feel free to give us a call here or send us an email. So with that, we will sign off and
Yeah,
we'll
we
be
will
back.
have a recording
Yep.
of some of the content. We don't share the recording typically of the training stuff that the Alliance Group does. But as long as the speakers are okay with it, we'll share the other parts of the summit on recording after the summit is over to your email. So.
Perfect. And then you can expect us to be back in either late September or early October for the next Alliance
So
Summit.
block out your calendar the entire 2 months,
For a whole-
just in
2
case,
months.
you know.
Yeah, 60 days, no big deal. Awesome, but hopefully you found this very informative and all of your questions were answered. And if you have any feedback, please let us know. We'll come back to you with a great list of new topics, some of which will be relevant and as far as what the times are, and others that are just interesting topics for small businesses to know about. So